Hey guys, Brian Alvarez here on Figure 4 Daily. We're here obviously to talk about the death of Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and his 7-year-old son Daniel. I'm sorry I haven't done an audio update in the last day or so. I pretty much wanted to wait until all of the facts were in, or at least the majority of the facts outside of the toxicology report, which is not going to be available for a couple of weeks. I don't know how I'm going to do this update. I'm just going to talk about stuff and hopefully cover everything. As everyone listening to this is obviously aware, Chris Benoit is allegedly killed his wife and his child this weekend. I'm going to go over the press conference notes here in a moment. The press conference just wrapped up. And, you know, I heard about this. I actually heard about this first from Tony. He had seen it on WWE.com, and he emailed me. And I went over and checked it out, and this was yesterday afternoon, obviously, and I was just in shock. I as everybody was. I had, as Craig noted on the board, I had known Chris Benoit for dating back to his WCW days. I can't even remember when I first met him. It was Spring Stampede or something outside his show, and I didn't talk to him regularly. I talked to him every few months. And we never really discussed, like, wrestling news. It was always what was going on in the business. Talked a lot about, he was always interested in what was going on in Mexico and Japan and that sort of thing. And we just talked about that sort of thing. And you know, everybody in WWE was shocked because they will all say the same thing, which is what I will say, is that, you know, prior to this, in all of my dealings with Chris Benoit, he came off as the nicest guy in the world. And you often hear it when there's a horrible tragedy. You hear from the neighbors and that sort of thing, and they all say it's usually one of two things. It's either we saw this, we should have seen this coming. He was weird. He kept to himself. This and that. I'm not surprised by what happened, but I'm shocked. Or you hear the other side of the story, which is people saying, I can't even fathom that this is possible. He was such a wonderful guy. He was a family man. It makes no sense. And that's the case with Chris Benoit. And, you know, all of the wrestlers in WWE, he was, as mentioned many times in the newsletter, a god in the locker room. He was like a legend in the locker room, a living legend. Everybody knew how great Chris Benoit was as a worker, and all the young wrestlers wanted to work like Chris Benoit. They wanted to have matches with Chris Benoit. They looked up to Chris Benoit. MVP, I'm sure, is devastated right now. This was, you know, in some ways his mentor. And Benoit, as everybody is well aware, was a guy that grew up idolizing the Dynamite Kid and broke into this business during a period where when you were 5'8", and probably sub 200 pounds when he first broke in fact, definitely sub 200 pounds, you couldn't be a giant superstar. You were not built like Hulk Hogan or the Ultimate Warrior, and thus your job was really to do jobs or to find work in Japan or obviously Calgary and Mexico and that sort of thing. And he was told, you will never make it in this business. And he went on to make it in this business. And he was a very hard worker. And he ultimately won the WWE title a month after Eddie Guerrero did. Two guys who never were going to make it in this business. And, you know, up until yesterday, I think that even in 2007, a lot of fans would have watched the final scene of WrestleMania 20 and maybe cried a little bit. And now I don't think most people will ever be able to really enjoy Chris Benoit matches again. And why something like this happens, I don't know. But I do know that after the Virginia Tech incident occurred, and I want to preface this by saying that I am not going to defend a man who killed his wife and his child. However, everybody always asks the question why, and they would like some sort of explanation. Because a normal person, in a fit of rage, you read about people killing their wife, some sort of jealous rage or whatever it might have been. You don't. It's different when you kill your wife and you kill your 7-year-old son. So this is not an effort to forgive or anything of that nature. This is merely trying to look for an explanation of why a man would do this. And when you look back at Chris Benoit's career and how hard he worked and the injuries that he sustained during his career and the very little amount of time off that he took, it seems inevitable that he may have suffered some sort of brain trauma. And I mean, we've seen a lot of stuff about brain trauma in the news. Andre Waters killed himself. It's becoming a bigger and bigger story, really, with each passing month. The realities of brain trauma in sports and how it affects lives, how it affects people later in life in terms of depression and that sort of thing. And a guy like Chris Benoit, who may have suffered some brain trauma, when you add onto that years and years of steroid abuse, and most likely he would have had to have some sort of predisposition, some sort of something that would cause a man to be able to do this. When you add all of this together, I think you get what we have. In the Virginia Tech, as I was talking about, in the aftermath of that, I listened to a lot of shows, and they obviously get a lot of experts on talking about people that have. Anyway, the point is, I heard from a guy who had investigated a lot of mass murderers, serial killers, guys that went into buildings and shot people. And he said that almost without fail, every single one of those individuals had some sort of brain issue. It was a situation where it affected parts of the brain that I guess would cause a normal person to not take a gun into a school or a supermarket or kill their wife and child. And again, I'm not defending Chris Benoit, but people are looking for answers. And to me, the only answer that makes any sense is brain trauma, steroid use, and some sort of predisposition. And steroids have been found in the house. And I can tell you, I talked to people when Chris Benoit went down with his neck injury, and you'll often see a lot of guys that go down with injuries that were on steroids shrink down. They end up much smaller, and then of course when it's time to return, they balloon back up again. But I was told that when Chris Benoit was down with neck surgery, he never got off steroids. He was massively concerned about losing any size, because I think he knew that at 5'8", he was right on the cusp of getting any sort of push, and the only, aside from the fact that he learned to be such a great worker, he had a physique. And during the entire time of recuperation, he apparently never got off the juice. This was the story that I was told. And, this is a guy that aside from, there was a period in WCW where he really shrunk down for a while, and I'm not sure what the circumstances were, but this is decades and decades of steroid use, no cycling, and that's not healthy in any way. And so anyway, the press conference occurred today, and I should note one more thing that to tie all of this together. I have done a number of interviews today, all sorts of radio interviews. CBS Evening News was here with the camera crew, and really the question that everyone seemed to care about more than anything else was, did this have to do with steroids? The media at this point, I truly believe, is going to jump all over the steroid aspects of this case, and this is going to change the industry. I do not know if this is going to change the industry to the better. For the better, I have no idea what's going to happen, because nothing like this has ever happened before. But I can say this: when Eddie Guerrero passed away, this business changed for a short period of time. When Eddie Guerrero died, and the coroner said he had an enlarged heart, enlarged internal organs, steroids, and human growth hormone use, a lot of guys in WWE probably sat down and they thought, I am a steroid user, I have taken human growth hormone, and perhaps in my life I've taken my fair share of street drugs. I am doing the same thing that killed Eddie Guerrero before his 40th birthday. And you also obviously had the people that loved Eddie Guerrero so much that they just swore off everything, and they changed their own lives. So WWE, when they instituted their wellness policy, they were 1,000% dead serious about this wellness policy. This was no joke. Everybody was affected by the death of Eddie Guerrero. Everybody loved Eddie Guerrero. Everybody said that Chris Benoit was such a nice guy, but he was a more private person than Eddie Guerrero. Eddie Guerrero, everybody knew everything about Eddie Guerrero. And everybody loved Eddie Guerrero. And it's one of the reasons that it hit everybody so hard was here was a guy that, everybody had seen on TV for so many years, and these personality profiles and talking about his life and his hardships and drugs and rehab and everything like that. And everybody really felt like they knew this man. And when he died, it was devastating for everybody. And Vince McMahon and everybody in WWE, they just, honest to God, wanted it all to end. No more premature deaths, never. And, they instituted this wellness policy, and were dead serious about it. They called in the third party, Dr. Black, who was in charge of everything, and you were responsible for yourself, and if you failed, this was not something that Vince McMahon got the results of first. Dr. Black got the results first. I mean, this was 100% serious. And it didn't last. When Eddie died, the steroid thing came out, and obviously this was a big story because steroids have been big in sports for the last several years now. And WWE, I hate using the other term, but they had an out. They said yes, he had long-term drug abuse in the past, which may have weakened his heart and such. And the out was they said, we are instituting a wellness policy. This won't happen again. We're going to make this public. It's on WWE.com. We're going to do all this stuff. This is a major deal. We're going to clean up our company. That's what they said. And so I think that in some ways they got off somewhat easy because that's what they did. Now, you didn't just have a top star die. You had a top star that allegedly killed his wife, bound her feet, strangled her to death, put a Bible next to her, walked into another room at some point, either Friday or Saturday, smothered his 7-year-old son to death, and then ultimately went into his weight room and wrapped a cable around his neck from his pull-down machine and hanged himself. It is a murder, it is a homicide-suicide, and it is something that right now the media is looking at as potentially related in some ways to the wellness policy, which has been ultimately a failure. About 3 months after the wellness policy went into effect, guys started getting bigger. And it was interesting because you could watch TV the first couple of weeks and guys got smaller, much smaller. It became, Hunter Hearst Helmsley was joking not even joking, he was burying Chris Masters on television for getting so small. And we can all look back to Vince McMahon making fun of Randy Orton because he got so small when he was down with his injury. He said he had a neck like a stack of dimes, and messages are always being sent. Vince McMahon is not sticking a syringe in anybody's ass, but he's sending some messages. And this wellness policy was in effect for about 3 months. And then, as always happens in wrestling, there were other things to be offended by. There was a schedule. There were injuries. One thing about steroids is when you come off, your body hurts. You feel like shit. And that's one of the reasons that they're not physiologically addictive, but they're psychologically addictive. And that's why guys, you see the guy in the gym that's always on the juice. He can't come off. He doesn't feel right when he's off. He's weak. He gets fat. And this does a number on the minds of a lot of people, and particularly people in the entertainment business who need this to make millions of dollars. And after about 3 months, as I said, the policy just sort of it was still enforced, but not to the level it was before. You weren't pulled off TV. You weren't pulled off house shows. You just weren't paid like you were normally paid, and life went on as normal. So nobody had to know who failed. There were failures. People think that the policy totally disappeared. It did not. There were failures, but nobody heard about the failures because nobody had to hear about the failures. They were kept quiet. And as far as the policy is concerned, there was a 3-strike rule, but testing was few and far between. And at this point, it was a situation where if you are a guy who is on top of the company because you're on steroids, you've got a fantastic body. And because of your position, you can make millions of dollars a year. All right? If you're making millions of dollars a year with your body, and without your body you may not, why not just take the fine? Take a month off without pay. Who cares? You're making $1 million a year, And if you were clean, you'd be making a hell of a lot less. So maybe this fine isn't so bad after all. I don't know what people were thinking, but I do know that the testing was legit. People weren't tested regularly, but testing did occur here and there. And guys were as big as ever. They were as big as ever. And now they have found steroids in Chris Benoit's house. And number one, this is not a guy who just died. This is a guy who killed himself, his family, and his child. Major story. And add to that the fact that the steroids were found in his house, and this was supposedly something that WWE had cleaned up. Clearly they had not. So it's similar, really, to when he passed away, and it was hours before mainstream news outlets had the story. Why? Because WWE cried wolf. Vince McMahon died in storyline. And thus, when Chris Benoit really died, and the news, of course, was first on WWE.com, nobody believed it. Just a storyline. And, personally, as much as I've seen in this business, I knew immediately that it was not a storyline. I mean, immediately. It never even entered my mind. What did enter my mind was perhaps the site was hacked. But once it had been up for more than 5 minutes, it was pretty clear that was not the case. But so anyway, they cried wolf, and now they have cried wolf with a wellness policy. They have claimed a wellness policy that clearly was a joke. And they're not going to be able to just say, well, we're going to clean up the business now. They already tried that. And clearly, they didn't. So where this goes from here, I do not know. I know that this news is a top story everywhere in the world. And WWE, this is a business that everybody who is a part of this website, Wrestling Observer, Torch, wherever, everybody who's a hardcore wrestling fan is pretty well aware of the realities of this business. And the real world, I think, is aware that this business is filled with debauchery, but I don't think they ever really fathomed the level of it. And I think that this story is going to open up the decadence of the wrestling business to the world. And what that will mean, I do not have any idea. I know that WWE is running shows tonight, and they're running SmackDown and ECW tonight, and they're going to just put matches on the air. And they've already taken nearly all references that are non-news related to Benoit off the website. Many of the match listings that included him no longer include him, which is rather interesting because he's on them. But, he does not exist on WWE.com except for the story that they are covering of what he has done. Now, I have the impression that the idea was, we will cover this story in depth on the website, and we will never mention Chris Benoit on TV ever again. You will never see footage of him on TV ever again unless absolutely necessary. And a good example of that would be the disappearance of Brock Lesnar, although he sort of had to appear when they did the Eddie deal on Sunday night at the pay-per-view. But I mean, other than moments where he must appear because they're paying tribute to somebody else, he will disappear forever from the world wrestling entertainment. Now, that was the plan. Now, I don't know what is going to happen. I don't know if anybody knew that the story would be quite as big as it is. It took so long to hit the mainstream that I thought, Paris Hilton getting out of jail is going to be a bigger story. And it's not. This is a significantly bigger story. This is the top story on a number of different outlets. And as an aside, by the way, Dave Meltzer was supposed to be on Good Morning America this morning, and they sent the film crew to his house. They were setting up, and this was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and then suddenly he was told that a bigger national story had broken, and they had to go. And if you look at the timeline, I don't know this for sure, but it appears that the bigger national story was Paris Hilton getting out of fucking jail. And I actually will not comment on that, but so anyway, that was what happened there. But this is a top story everywhere that you look, and it is going to change the wrestling business. I don't know how. I was asked how on Mauro Ranallo's show today, and I don't have an answer. There's always been talk of wrestling needs an off season. I think that it does. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're not running programming 52 weeks a year. It could be a situation where guys are rotated in and out, Perhaps you work 6 months at a time and get 6 months off, or 3 months at a time or 3 months off, which really would be better in so many different ways, not only for the health of the performers and the burnout and such, and injury rehabilitation, and even guys being allowed to cycle off steroids because they're off TV for 6 months, but it also would help as far as storylines are concerned. You would not see the same guy on TV 52 weeks a year. I remember I used to watch Lucha, and when you watch CMLL, I mean, there are guys on there that were headlining in 1980. But the key is that on TV, you only saw the top matches, the main event perhaps in the semi-main, and the main eventers would rotate. Los Villanos would be in the main event for several months, and then they would sort of disappear down to the third match on the card, and you'd see them at Arena Mexico, but you wouldn't see them on TV. And they would sort of disappear for a while, and a new crop of main eventers. Los Talibanes would work in the main event. And then after 3 months, it would rotate again, and so you had long periods of not seeing stars. But you had other stars in the main event that were the focus of TV, and CMLL has been in business for 74 years now or something. So there are benefits to cycling the TV. I think absolutely, without question, there need to be regular EKG screenings. There need to be regular MRIs. Everybody's brain needs to be examined. And if your brain is messed up, you're done. Or if there are the makings of your brain being messed up, you're done. And, people are going to say it's never going to happen. Maybe you're right. I'm looking at possibilities that need to happen. Drug testing needs to be taken deadly seriously from this point forward. There needs to be a complete overhaul of the mind of Vince McMahon. He cannot help but push giant bodies. That must change. As long as the bigger you are, the higher you are on the card, steroids, drugs will always be a part of this business. It will just get to the point where they're harder to detect. The main eventers with the most money will have the access to the newest drugs on the market that are the most difficult to test for. There will always be ways around the system as long as the system benefits larger men. And these are all things that if you ask me today, I can't fathom these changes being made. I'm simply telling you what changes need to be made. An off-season, thorough medical screening, and guys just basically becoming road agents or managers or whatever the case may be, paid some sort of pension for the rest of their careers. Not necessarily hundreds of thousands of dollars, but something to get them away from television. Because otherwise, we have seen, and I'm not saying this will happen. I am merely looking at the history of all of the sports entertainment business. Pride had a giant scandal. And Pride was doing ratings better than anything WWE has ever done. Ever. Just gigantic numbers. They were an institute in Japan, hugely popular, making millions of dollars for the network. They had a huge scandal, and it was over. And I'm not saying this will happen in WWE, but should USA Network cancel Raw? Should CW cancel SmackDown? Should Sci-Fi cancel ECW? As mentioned, a couple weeks ago in my Fight Network column, the majority of their money comes from television rights fees. They lose those fees. There's $80 million a year gone. They lose the TV and pay-per-view, which is already sinking, gone. They lose TV and your licensing, your pay-per-view revenues, it's all gone. Losing television can kill World Wrestling Entertainment. I am not saying they're going to lose TV, but we have never seen anything of this magnitude. Owen Hart died, and it was an accident. It was a very tragic accident. Eddie Guerrero died. It was a look inside this business, but it was a man dying, and it was a company saying this won't happen again because we're instituting a policy. Chris Benoit died. Chris Benoit killed his wife. Chris Benoit killed his child, and it was a failure of the policy that they instituted after the death of Eddie Guerrero, and I have no earthly idea how this is going to affect the wrestling business, except things are going to change. And I'm not saying for the positive, I'm not saying for the negative, I don't know, I just know things are going to change. And this is a story. This is the biggest story I've ever been a part of in 12 years of doing the newsletter and in the last several years of doing the website. And I pray that we will never have a story like this ever again. And when I look at the why, the potential brain issues, steroids, and just a predisposition, many wrestlers have at least two of those three. Many wrestlers are taking steroids. Many wrestlers have had some major brain issues, a lot of which was developed in the late 90s, and maybe we're only going to start just recently seeing the signs. I mean, Mike Awesome killed himself, and he took so many chair shots to the head. And Chris Benoit worked a very hard style and took a lot of shots to the head. He was not a guy to put his hand up on chair shots, and he killed himself and his family. And there are a lot of guys that are getting to an age now, they're hitting 35, 40, 45, and in their younger years, they took a lot of brain damage. And I'm not saying that we're going to see a rash of murder-suicides, but I think we may see a rash of suicides. And for certain guys, maybe we will see some behavior like this. I don't know. But I hope never again. But the reality is that people will die, without question. I hope that we do not see more murders. I hope that we do not see more murders of children. I mean, the press conference that occurred today, I'm going to read this. This was Larry Kasanka's report. The lead investigator said yesterday they came to the home after receiving a call for a welfare check. He missed some out-of-state work. They became concerned. Police found the bodies of Chris Benoit, Nancy, and Daniel, all deceased. Autopsies were performed, ruled a double homicide-suicide. They feel Friday he murdered his wife via asphyxiation. Later that weekend, the same for Daniel. Sunday morning is when they feel he hung himself in the basement area. They're waiting on toxicology reports, which could take up to 2 weeks. Chavo Guerrero received a text message on Sunday, which worried him, and likely, I don't know what the situation was. I've heard that the cell phone delivered the text message late, which happens to me all the time, so that makes sense. But they're not releasing the results, or they're not releasing the text of the text message. I have heard rumors about what that was in the text message, and it was strange. It indicated that there may have been a problem with Chris Benoit, but if I were Chavo Guerrero and I read what is rumored to have been in the text message, in no way would I have been concerned about Nancy and the baby. I would have been concerned about Chris Benoit. I'm not sure why it took so long for people to get gravely worried. My guess, just from personal experience and from talking to a lot of people that knew Chris Benoit, is that nobody could ever have fathomed not only that he would kill his wife and child, but that he would do anything to himself. And this is why directly after the deaths were made public, everybody looked for an explanation such as it was a murder, somebody broke in, a gas leak, and then when it was clear that it was an incident from inside the house, everybody began thinking, well, maybe Nancy went crazy and killed her child, and Chris Benoit, in a fit of rage, killed her, and then in great remorse killed himself, which to many people in this situation was the best possible scenario, which there is no best possible scenario in a situation like this, but if there were a best possible scenario, it would be something of that nature. Nancy had some issues as far as I've been told. She had some depression-related issues, and she could have lost her mind and in some sort of, maybe even a freak accident, had killed her child. And then Benoit, not knowing how to take that, would have killed her and then realized what had happened and killed himself. People were thinking everything except that Chris Benoit came home, he tied up and killed his wife, and then he killed his son, and then he hung himself. Nobody ever could have believed that this sort of thing could have been possible. And I think that's why the strange text messages were not cause for necessarily immediate alarm. If there was a period when people were very worried about Kurt Angle, and if they'd gotten a weird text message, there would have been someone there within moments, because everybody figured he's going to die, something horrible is going to happen. But there was never that thought with Chris Benoit, and that's all I can think of. I can't blame Chavo Guerrero for anything. When Owen Hart died, the aftermath, everybody talking about should the show have gone on, should the show not have gone on. And to me, when something like that happens and you're so numb and you have no idea what's going on, and I firmly believe that those in WWE did what they thought was right. And maybe, you could argue afterwards, maybe they would think something differently today. But at the time, in that moment of tragedy, they did what they felt was right. And I think that Chavo Guerrero, obviously in hindsight, it looks like it would not have mattered either way. But I'm sure that it probably greatly bothers him in hindsight. But it was Chris Benoit, and nobody could have thought anything even remotely like this. So that's the text message story right there. But there were no notes left that they have found. So that sort of there was a story that the Nancy killing the child and Benoit killing her and writing a suicide note and hanging himself. Apparently that is very much confirmed is not the case. The son was in his bed. Benoit had been arrested for a DUI in the county, but not for domestic abuse. They have not confirmed the allegations of abuse or the reported divorce attempt, which of course is in the paper, that she filed for divorce and separation and a restraining order, and he and ultimately she rescinded that, and they got back together. This was like 2003. They found legal prescriptions in the residence. There were steroids, as pretty much everybody knew, but can't really say it, but everybody knew. There's no motive as of now with the evidence that they have. They say he sent text message. They will not comment on the contents of such. They will not speculate if steroids had anything to do with the death or his state of mind. It appears he hung himself within 24 hours of killing his son. They reiterate the 2 weeks on toxicology reports. The DA joins the conference. No statement prepared. He takes questions. The bizarre circumstances are that in a community like this, this is what is odd. A 7-year-old is dead. We may not understand why. The timing is what he feels is bizarre, but they have not verified all of the times. There was a Bible beside each of the victims, Nancy and Daniel. Nancy was bound by her hands and feet, as well as some blood under her head. She was wrapped in a towel. No signs of struggle with the son. He says that in 2003 there was an order of protection brought against Benoit, but he has not seen all of the paperwork. He's baffled as to why someone would kill a 7-year-old. The families have been contacted. He has had no communications with the WWE. I have today, and people are devastated. Nobody... It's such a horrible thing to a guy that everybody so respected until yesterday that it's I'm not going to mention any names, but there's some really fucked up people in this business, and if they passed away, it would be, we saw it coming forever. It's sad, but this and that. This was a guy that nobody saw it coming. Number one, he just was so unlike the Chris Benoit that everybody knew. And obviously this is unlike anybody, but the Chris Benoit that everybody knew could not, have even killed himself, much less his wife and particularly his child. And so they're reeling, and nobody knows what's going on, and it's just it's a madhouse. But they reiterate that Nancy died Friday. And hold on one second. They reiterate that Nancy died Friday, Daniel early Saturday, and Chris sometime late Saturday, early Sunday. Benoit hung himself with a cord from his weight machines. They need to get all of the toxicology results to see if things match up. 2 weeks, maybe longer. If nothing else comes up, they will come out or if anything else comes up, they will come out and rebrief the media. So that's the story. That's pretty much. That's mostly all that I know. I'm looking through the article I've put up on the front page. A lot of stuff in the Atlanta Journal. I do want to make mention of one thing that I got an angry email yesterday from somebody that had read a quote that I had made that is now all over the place, as it turns out. And And they asked me, this was yesterday like at about 4 p.m. when nobody knew anything, and they asked me if anybody knew anything, and I said, no, nobody knows anything. And somehow the reporter, maybe he'd asked a marital problems question earlier or something like that, but he put in little brackets or whatever that when I said that, I was referring to marital issues. And so that quote went all over the place, and I guess it's in newspapers all over now with the marital. Some have even taken out the brackets and have just utterly changed my quote. But the point was, somebody was very upset because he had insisted. He had talked to somebody in WWE, he said. I don't know if it was actually somebody in WWE claiming that or if he'd actually talked to somebody, but this person was so upset that I had said that because he insisted that he knew Chris Benoit and there had never been any sort of marital issue. And when I heard that I had supposedly been quoted as saying that, I immediately emailed the guy and I said, I did not say anything about marital issues because I had never heard anything. I mean, the closest I'd heard was, and this is said about everybody, that when he was down with injury, he was dying to get on the road to get away from his family. That's what people said. And, when I heard that, I was like, well, a lot of wrestlers go stir crazy, and they're around their family all the time. And wrestlers have even said, my wife wants to get me out of the house. She can't handle me around anymore. And so that's what I took it as, but that's all I'd ever heard. And that's all that almost everybody had ever heard. I mean, now that this stuff is coming out, people are utterly blown away at the life that they did not know about Chris Benoit. And so anyway, I emailed him and he removed that from the main article, but everyone else had already picked it up, and now it's just so yeah, now it's coming out that there actually were marital issues, which I was unaware of, but the point is that everybody was unaware of them, and it's just come as an utter shock to everybody. But those stories are in there, and let's see what other notes are here. Just, so many stories over the last couple of days, and I've got links up to, and this is like just a tiny sampling, Chicago Tribune, Sun-Times, Daily Mirror, Sun-Times, Calgary Sun, WSB TV, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Edmonton Sun, on and on and on and on. And, yeah, it was, as someone that knew Benoit, I'm very numb. Yesterday when it first happened, when I heard about it, I was devastated. And then when I started hearing more details, it was like you talk to somebody. When Eddie Guerrero died, I talked to him a lot, and he was just a broken man. And I've talked to people in the last couple of days that have asked the question, was he ever the same after that? And I don't know. I don't know if he was, but I talked to him a lot, and he was just devastated. And you talk to somebody for so long about something so personal, and he would tell me stories about how when Eddie died, I have a journal, and I write in the journal every day. I write letters to Eddie, and I know he can't read them, but I write them anyway, and it helps me get by. And he was devastated about the children, and Eddie's family, and then one day he called and he asked for my address, and he said, I want to send you something. And it was an Eddie Guerrero chair from No Way Out, where he had won the title, where Eddie had won the title. It was an Eddie Guerrero memorial. It was a chair that was there that night, basically, and he sent it to me along with a note, and I showed the note to Vinny, and we both said the same thing. We were like, how can a man... And I'm just saying the quote at the time. Obviously, we will not be saying this in the future, but we said, how can a man so great be such a nice guy? It was unbelievable. I mean, I've met so many guys in this business, and he was just a guy that seemed so nice. He would always say, take care and take care of yourself and all of this. And the last time I talked to him was before WrestleMania. And he called up and he wanted the phone number or the address for a guy that made belts, because he basically talked to me for 15 minutes about what a great man Booker T was. He loved Booker T, and he wanted to make a replica WCW title belt and give it to Booker T as a gift. I don't know what had happened. I don't know if he felt the best of 7 series in WCW had elevated him to where he is today, or what the deal was, or how close they were. But he asked me these questions, and he talked about Benoit and about the young guys and helping them out. And the phone call ended, and again, I hung up and I thought, that is the nicest guy in the business. And so I hear that he's died, and I'm utterly devastated. And then I start hearing that he may have killed his wife. And then I hear that he may have killed his son, who I heard him talking about his son for years, just in love with the child. And now I'm utterly numb. I mean, if you listen to this and it's you're just like, why, what's going on here? I am numb. I am utterly numb. All day yesterday, I don't know what is going to happen as far as doing a newsletter for this week. I've not missed a week in 12 years, but I don't ever want to write a newsletter again, quite frankly. I will, but I have no desire to do any writing or I don't want to watch any wrestling. I don't want to have anything to do with wrestling, but I will. And all day yesterday it was just hearing stuff and reading stuff, and I heard stuff that, people would preface it by, I heard this and I feel like vomiting, and I heard everything, and it was all day yesterday. I think I went to bed at 3 and I was up at like 7 or 8, and I have not had quite frankly, I have not had a chance to think. I have not had a single chance to really think. I mean, I've been asked questions, and I've analyzed. My brain has tried to analyze things and answer questions as I've done throughout this thing. But it's almost like my brain is on autopilot. I'm answering questions. My brain is sort of it's like a computer. Which, if you've listened to a lot of shows, that's quite the piece of comedy right there. But it's like a computer that's working on its own, and I'm answering all these questions. And I've done all of these interviews, and everybody seems to be happy. I've not been zombified, but I have not had a chance to think really. I just haven't had a chance to think, and I'm afraid of the time when I'm going to have a chance to think. But so far, it has not occurred yet. So. Yeah, that's the update. I really don't have any other news. I don't know if anything happened in the last hour because I've been doing this. But I have a bunch of other interviews today, so if anything new happens and you want to hear more, the front page of the website, the main Chris Benoit story has a list of upcoming appearances today, so we'll just be talking about everything. But I guess to sum it up, life sucks, and I don't understand. But I'm going to we will continue reporting on the story. So thanks everybody for listening. Everybody, I guess it really sounds weird after talking about Benoit saying this, but everybody take care. And I shall be back up again very soon talking more about this story. So thanks again, everybody. I really appreciate it. Love you all, and I'll talk to you in a little while.